constant across 1,000,000 worlds and 10,000 years of history. The Emperor protects. Duty is its own reward. In death, service continues. But there is another truth, one whispered in the darkness of the underhive, one that keeps even the most faithful awake in their sleep cycles. It is truth that there are fates worse than death, horrors so complete and absolute that death would be a mercy long denied. To understand what it means to live on a hive world being consumed by tyrannids, you must first understand what it means to exist in one of humanity's greatest monuments and most terrible prisons. You must comprehend the scale of these towering arcologies, the billions upon billions of souls packed into structures that scrape the very clouds. You must feel the recycled air in your lungs, taste the corpse starch on your tongue, and know that everything you are exists only to feed the endless machine of imperial production. And then, when you understand what it means to barely survive in such a place, you must imagine something infinitely worse. You must imagine an enemy that sees your entire world not as a conquest, not as a prize to be taken, but as nothing more than food. Imagine an intelligence so vast and alien that it spans galaxies, directing countless billions of bioengineered horrors with a single purpose: to consume everything you are, everything you ever were, and everything you ever could be. This is the reality for those who find themselves on a hive world in the path of a tyrannid hive fleet. This is the slow descent into a nightmare from which there is no awakening, no rescue, and no escape. The tyrannids do not conquer, they do not occupy, they devour, and when they are finished, they leave behind only silence and stone. The Imperium catalogues approximately 32,380 hive worlds across its vast domain, though the actual number fluctuates as worlds are lost to Xenos invasions, warp storms, or simple bureaucratic oversight. Each of these worlds represents a crucial component in the Imperial war machine, producing not just weapons and materials, but the most valuable resource of all: human beings. Billions upon billions of potential soldiers, workers, and servants of the Emperor, all concentrated in massive urban sprawls that can be seen from orbit. When the tyrannids come to such a world, they come to a feast beyond imagining. Every single inhabitant represents biomass to be harvested. Every structure, though made of metal and stone, sits upon foundations of organic waste and accumulated biological matter. The very air in these hive cities, recycled through organic filtration systems and breathing plants, contains nutrients that can be extracted and consumed. A hive world is not just a target for the tyrannids. It is a buffet of such magnitude that entire hive fleets will alter their course to reach it. But before we can understand the consumption, we must understand what is being consumed. We must see the world as it exists before the shadow falls, before the sky fills with spores, before the screaming begins. The world that was Hive Primus stands 73 kilometers tall at its highest spire. From the viewing platforms reserved for the planetary governor and his immediate staff, you can see the curvature of the planet itself, the way the ash wastes stretch to the horizon in every direction, broken only by the distant peaks of other hive cities. The air at this altitude is thin but pure, filtered through 100 levels of atmospheric processes, scented with exotic flowers imported from agri-worlds light years away. But you are not standing on those viewing platforms. Few are. The population of Hive Primus numbers somewhere between 47 and 52 billion souls, and fewer than 10,000 of them will ever breathe air that has not passed through 10,000 other pairs of lungs. First, you work in Manufactorum Delta 779, 12 kilometers below the hive's crown and 18 kilometers above its foundations. Your shift began 14 hours ago and will continue for another 6. The work is simple, repetitive, and absolutely essential. You operate a press that stamps out shell casings for heavy bolter rounds, each one precisely calibrated to imperial specifications that were ancient before your grandfather's grandfather was born. The Manufactorum stretches for kilometers in every direction, a vast chamber carved from the bones of the hive itself. The ceiling disappears into shadows high above, marked only by the occasional flicker of lighting arrays that struggle against the darkness. The floor is a maze of assembly lines, each one tended by hundreds of workers who perform their designated tasks with the mindless efficiency that comes from a lifetime of repetition. The noise is constant, overwhelming, a symphony of industrial fury that makes conversation impossible and renders thought difficult. The clang of metal on metal, the hiss of hydraulics, the grinding of gears, the occasional scream when someone makes a mistake and loses a hand or arm to the machinery. These sounds are the soundtrack of your existence, as familiar as your own heartbeat. The air here is hot and thick with the smell of machine oil, ozone from welding torches, and the peculiar metallic tang of recycled atmosphere that has passed through too many filters without ever seeing the sky. You breathe it without thinking, just as you ignore the ache in your back from standing at your station, the burning in your eyes from staring at the same movement for hours on end, the hunger that gnaws at your belly because the last meal was 8 hours ago and the next is still 4 hours away. This is your life. This is the only life you have ever known, and the only life you will ever know unless injury or age renders you unable to work, at which point you will be recycled like everything else in the hive. Your corpse will be rendered down into corpse starch to feed the next generation of workers, and your bones will be ground into fertilizer for the few remaining food production facilities. Nothing is wasted in a hive city. Nothing can be wasted when billions must be sustained on a world whose surface has long since been rendered uninhabitable by industry. Above you, separated by kilometers of rockcrete and plasteel, the mid-hivers live in relative comfort. They are the administrators, the overseers, the minor nobles who manage the countless systems that keep the hive functioning. They have natural light, piped in through elaborate mirror systems from the surface. They have running water that comes from purification plants rather than condensation collectors. They have food that resembles actual food, rather than the grey-brown nutrient paste that sustains the workers below. But even they are nothing compared to those who dwell in the spires, the nobility, the merchant princes, the high-ranking members of the Adeptus Administratum, who coordinate the hive's contribution to the imperial tithe. These privileged few live in a world of luxury that would seem fantastical to someone like you. They have gardens, actual growing things tended by armies of servants. They have windows that look out upon the world beyond the hive. They have access to off-world goods, exotic foods, and entertainments that the masses below can scarcely imagine. And below you, separated by another 18 kilometers of hive structure, lies the underhive. Here, the rule of imperial law has long since broken down, replaced by the brutal hierarchy of gangs and mutant tribes. Here, in the ruins of older construction, in the collapsed sectors and forgotten chambers, humanity reverts to its basest instincts. Here, the weak are prey, and the strong survive only until someone stronger comes along. The population of the underhive is unknown, and probably unknowable. The Adeptus Arbites makes periodic sweeps, culling the numbers when they grow too large, but new inhabitants simply flood in to replace the dead. Some are criminals, fleeing justice in the levels above. Others are simply the unlucky, those who fell through the cracks of imperial society and found themselves in the darkness below. A few are mutants, their genetic corruption making them unwelcome in the higher levels, forced to eke out an existence among the ruins and refuse. This vertical segregation is the natural order of a hive city. Those at the top literally look down upon those below, and those below can only dream of ascending even a single level closer to the light. It is a system that has persisted for thousands of years across thousands of worlds, brutal in its efficiency and absolute in its enforcement. But it is also a system built on a foundation that assumes the Imperium's protection, that takes for granted the relative stability that comes from being just one more world among millions. It assumes that life will continue as it always has, generation after generation, world without end. That assumption is about to be tested in ways that no one in the hive can possibly imagine. Your shift finally ends, and you make your way through the labyrinthine corridors that connect the manufactorum to your hab block. The journey takes 45 minutes, navigating through passages so crowded that you must sometimes turn sideways to squeeze between the press of bodies. The air grows no fresher as you travel. If anything, it becomes worse, thick with the smell of unwashed humanity and the peculiar sourness of recycled water. Your hab unit is a cube measuring 3 meters by 3 meters by 2.5 meters high. You share it with your spouse and 2 children. There is a sleeping pallet that folds down from one wall, a small cooking unit that runs on geothermal power tapped from deep within the hive, and a waste reclamation unit that processes everything into fertilizer for the hive's food production systems. There are no windows, of course. Windows are for those who can afford to have something to look at, and you are 18 kilometers above the surface and 12 kilometers below the spire. There is nothing to see but the corridor outside, which looks exactly like every other corridor in this section of the hive. This is home. This is what you fight to return to each day, what you labor to maintain. It is not much, but it is yours, purchased with your sweat and sanctified by the presence of your family. Your children were born here, and if the Emperor wills it, they will work in the same manufactorum you do, stamping out shell casings for bolters that will be fired on worlds they will never see, in wars they will never comprehend. You eat your evening meal, a portion of corpse starch mixed with protein supplement and flavored with a few precious drops of synthetic seasoning. Your spouse has managed to acquire a small addition of textured fungus protein, a rare treat that makes the meal almost palatable. You share it with your children, watching as they eat with the unconscious hunger of youth, and you feel something that might be contentment. Tomorrow will be the same as today. The day after that will be the same as tomorrow. This is the rhythm of life in a hive city, unchanging and eternal. You have your work, your family, your small corner of the Emperor's Imperium. What more could anyone ask for? You do not know that this is the last normal meal you will ever eat. You do not know that within 3 solar days, the very concept of normalcy will be shattered beyond recognition. You do not know that the sky above the hive, hidden from your sight by kilometers of rockcrete and steel, is already beginning to change. The stars are going out, one by one, obscured by something vast and terrible that approaches from the void. The astropaths in their sanctums high in the spire have begun to scream, their minds overwhelmed by a psychic pressure that builds like a coming storm. The navigators who guide ships through the warp have found their vision clouded, the Astronomican's light dimmed by an interference they cannot name or comprehend. And in the underhive, in the deepest and darkest places, where even the gangers fear to tread, things that have lurked in shadow for decades are beginning to stir, responding to a call that echoes across the light years. The Genestealer cults, patient and prepared, feel the approach of their gods and begin their final preparations. The feast is about to begin. The shadow falls. The first sign that something is wrong comes not with violence or obvious threat, but with silence. The Vox systems that connect the hive to the wider world, that carry news from across the sector and beyond, that maintain the constant flow of information necessary for a world of 50 billion souls to function, begin to fail. At first, it is subtle. A delay in receiving the daily, astropathic transmissions from the sector capital, a slight degradation in the signal quality of off-world communications, the kind of thing that might be explained by solar flares or unusual warp currents. But it continues and it worsens. Within 2 days, all astropathic communication has ceased entirely. The messages that do come through are fragmented, incoherent, spoken by astropaths whose minds are clearly fracturing under some unseen pressure. They speak of a darkness in the warp, of something vast and hungry that blots out the light of the Astronomican. They speak of screaming silence and chittering void, of minds that are not minds and thoughts that burn like acid. And then they stop speaking at all. The planetary governor convenes an emergency session of his advisory council. Representatives from the Adeptus Administratum, the Planetary Defense Force, the Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests, who maintain the hive's infrastructure, and the local ecclesiarchy gather in the great council chamber high in the spire. The air is thick with incense and tension, and for the first time in living memory, there is genuine fear in the eyes of those who rule. The chief astropath, when he is brought before the council, is barely recognizable as human. His eyes weep blood, and his hands shake with a tremor that speaks of neurological damage. When he speaks, his voice is a broken whisper that somehow carries through the chamber. "The stars are screaming," he says. "The warp is drowning in alien thoughts. Billions upon billions of minds, none of them human, all of them hungry. They are coming. Emperor, preserve us. They are coming, and there is nothing we can do to stop them." The governor demands clarification, demands specifics, demands to know what enemy approaches and when it will arrive. But the astropath can provide no useful intelligence. The psychic interference is too great, the shadow in the warp too complete. He knows only that something vast and terrible approaches, something that drowns out all other psychic signals like a scream, drowning out a whisper. And then, as the council debates and argues and struggles to understand what this means, the astropath begins to laugh. It is a horrible sound, broken and wrong, and it continues even as blood runs from his nose and ears. His laughter ends only when his heart stops, the strain of whatever he has experienced proving too much for his enhanced physiology to withstand. In the sanctums where the other astropaths dwell, protected by wards and psychic shields, similar scenes are playing out. Of the 17 astropaths assigned to the hive, 12 die within the first 3 days of the Shadow's arrival. The 5 who survive do so only by severing their connection to the warp entirely, rendering themselves useless for their intended purpose, but preserving their sanity and their lives. For the common people of the hive, these events are unknown. You go to work, you come home, you sleep and wake and work again. But there are small changes that begin to accumulate, details that individually mean nothing but collectively paint a picture of something wrong. The daily announcements that play through the hive's public vox systems, usually filled with imperial propaganda and productivity quotas, become shorter and less frequent. The overseers in the manufactorums seem nervous, distracted, and more than usually harsh with those who fail to meet their quotas. There are whispers of supply shipments that have failed to arrive, of warehouses that are beginning to run low on essential materials. And then there are the dreams. You wake in the middle of your sleep cycle, your heart pounding, your mind filled with images that dissolve like smoke when you try to grasp them. You dreamed of hunger, vast and all-consuming, of teeth and claws and endless appetite. You dreamed of the sky falling, of walls melting like wax, of your children screaming as something unseen dragged them into darkness. You tell yourself it was just a nightmare, stress from increased quotas perhaps, or bad protein supplement in your last meal. But when you speak to your spouse, you learn that they too had troubled dreams. And when you arrive at work, you overhear others speaking of similar experiences. The dreams are spreading through the hive like a disease, touching everyone, regardless of their station or position. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus have a different perspective on the changes occurring. Their augmetic sensors detect shifts in electromagnetic fields, unusual patterns in the hive's power distribution, subtle variations in the planet's magnetic field that have no natural explanation. Their most sensitive instruments pick up what they describe as background noise in every frequency, a kind of static that should not exist. Some of the more knowledgeable among them recognize the signs. They have read the reports from other worlds, other sectors, other times when the Tyranids came. They know what the shadow in the warp represents, what it means when the stars go silent, and the warp becomes thick with alien thought. They make their recommendations to the planetary authorities, urging immediate mobilization of all military forces, evacuation of non-essential personnel, and a request for Imperial assistance. But who can they ask? The astropaths are dead or useless. No ship can safely navigate the warp when the shadow falls so heavily. They are alone, cut off from the Imperium that is supposed to protect them, isolated on a world that has become a target for an enemy they cannot yet see. In the spires, the nobility begins to panic. Some make arrangements to flee off-world, bribing void ship captains to take them through the warp, despite the danger. A few succeed, their vessels disappearing into the immaterium and never being heard from again, their fate unknown and unknowable. Most find that the ships they had counted on have already departed, their captains unwilling to risk their vessels and crews for any price. Those who cannot flee begin to fortify. Private armies are expanded, security measures are enhanced, and stockpiles of food and water are secured behind reinforced doors. The wealthy have always known that the masses below might rise up if pushed too far, and now they prepare for that eventuality, even as they remain ignorant of the true threat that approaches. In the Underhive, the gangs feel it too, though they lack the education to understand what they sense. The mutants and the outcasts, those whose altered genetics make them more sensitive to psychic phenomena, huddle in their dens and speak of doom approaching. Some flee deeper into the ruins, seeking shelter in levels so old that they remember when the planet still had a sky that could be seen. Others prepare to fight, not knowing what they will fight or when it will come, only that something is coming and that hiding will not save them. And in the deepest, most forgotten places of the Underhive, in chambers sealed for centuries and forgotten by all but a few, the Genestealer cults gather. They have waited for this moment for generations, ever since the first pure-strain Genestealer found its way into the hive aboard a merchant vessel and began its patient work of infection and reproduction. The cult has grown slowly, carefully, seeding itself throughout the hive's population. The first generation of hybrids were monstrous things, barely able to pass for human, relegated to the darkest corners of the Underhive. But each subsequent generation became more human in appearance, able to move freely through hive society, to take positions of minor authority, to spread the infection further. By now, the cult numbers in the hundreds of thousands spread across all levels of the hive. There are cultists among the factory workers, among the Adeptus Administratum clerks, among the enforcers of the Adeptus Arbites. There are even a few among the nobility, their genetic corruption hidden by wealth and privilege, their true nature known only to their patriarch and the alien will that guides them all. For years they have waited, preparing for the day of ascension, when their gods would come to deliver them from the oppression of the Imperium. They have stockpiled weapons in hidden caches throughout the hive. They have identified key targets, strategic locations that will need to be secured when the time comes. They have infiltrated the PDF and know the positions of every major defensive emplacement. And now, as the shadow in the warp grows stronger, as the psychic call of the hive fleet echoes in their minds like a trumpet blast, they know their time has come. The Patriarch, ancient and massive, its psychic power swollen by decades of growth, sends out the signal that they have all been waiting for. The uprising begins. The enemy within it starts in the manufacturing districts, in the vast complexes where billions labor to produce the materials that feed the imperial war machine. Workers who have seemed normal, even exemplary, suddenly turn on their fellows with a savagery that is both shocking and coordinated. They move with purpose, with unified intent, targeting overseers and enforcers first, then anyone who attempts to resist. You are at your station when it happens, pressing out shell casings with the mindless efficiency of long practice. When the worker 3 stations down from you pulls a makeshift weapon from beneath their workstation and drives it into the overseer's throat. Before you can process what you have seen, before you can even react, 2 more workers rush the secondary overseer, bearing him to the ground with sheer numbers, their hands and improvised weapons rising and falling in a frenzy of violence. The manufactorum erupts into chaos. Some workers flee, running for the exits in blind panic. Others stand frozen, unable to comprehend what they are witnessing. And still others, more than you would, have believed possible, reveal themselves as part of the uprising, producing weapons and moving with coordinated purpose to secure the exits, to disable the Vox systems, to take control of the facility. You run. You do not think, you simply react, fleeing toward the nearest exit. Behind you, you can hear screaming, the sounds of violence and death. You see workers you have labored beside for years transforming before your eyes into something else, their human features twisted by an alien fervor that burns in their eyes like fever. You make it into the corridor beyond the manufactorum, and here the scene is even worse. The uprising is not limited to your facility. It is happening everywhere simultaneously. A coordinated strike timed with precision across thousands of locations throughout the hive. The corridors are choked with people, some fleeing, others fighting, and still others who have revealed their true nature as cultists. And among the cultists, you see things that cannot be, should not be. Figures that are too tall, too thin, their movements fluid and wrong. You catch glimpses of extra limbs, of distended heads, of skin that seems to ripple and shift. These are the earlier generation hybrids, the ones who could not pass for fully human, now freed from their hiding places and eager to participate in the uprising they have dreamed of for so long. You think of your family, your spouse and children in your hab unit kilometers away, and you begin to fight your way through the chaos toward them. The journey that usually takes 45 minutes stretches into hours as you navigate through corridors that have become war zones. Enforcers of the Adeptus Arbites, those who have not already been killed or revealed as cultists themselves, fight desperate holding actions at key choke points, trying to maintain some semblance of order. You see an enforcer cut down by gunfire, his armor unable to withstand the concentrated fire of a dozen cultists armed with stolen lace guns. You see civilians torn apart by hybrid monstrosities that move with terrifying speed and strength. You see things that will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life, however long that may be. By the time you reach your hab block, it has already been overrun. The corridors are filled with the dead, and the walls are marked with strange symbols painted in blood, sigils that hurt to look at, that seem